The sky rumbled with the thunderous approach of something unnatural. For the people of Earth, it wasn't just another storm on the horizon, it was an omen. The Talrath fleet, a towering armada of gleaming warships, tore through the atmosphere like a swarm of locusts, their engines blazing with a hunger for conquest. As the invaders touched down on Earth, they thought they were facing just another primitive species, another conquest in their endless campaign across the galaxy. They were wrong. Commander Kale Draven watched from the makeshift command center, his eyes steely as he surveyed the city's ruined skyline. It had been days since the first wave of Talrath invaders landed, and humanity had already begun to scramble for survival. The Talrath, with their sleek ships and advanced weaponry, struck first, hitting the major cities with deadly precision, reducing them to ash. But Kale knew something they didn't. The Talrath weren't prepared for what Earth could do. The Talrath had come expecting to face a world of soft, fragile creatures. Mankind's reputation in the stars was that of an unworthy opponent. It was their first mistake. Kale had fought in wars before, seen more bloodshed than most would in a lifetime, and it had all led to this. The world was crumbling beneath the alien assault, but Kale's resolve burned like a furnace. Earth was his home, and he'd be damned if he let it fall without a fight. He turned to his lieutenant, Kira Voss, her eyes sharp and focused, the weight of their situation heavy in her stance. "The Talrath don't know what they've stepped into," Kale said, his voice low but filled with cold fury. "This planet isn't theirs to take. Not today." Kira nodded, her hand resting on the communication panel. "They're pushing us back, Commander. Our cities are in ruins. We need to respond. Let them push. It's a trap." Kale's words hung in the air, thick with meaning. The invaders were confident in their technology, their weapons, their superiority. But Kale knew Earth better than anyone. Earth's wilderness, its jungles, deserts, and mountains, was as deadly as any weapon. And it would fight back. The sound of distant explosions shook the ground, and Kale's grip tightened on the table before him. "We're not waiting for them to come to us. We're going to meet them on their turf, hit them where they least expect it." Kira's eyes narrowed. "Guerrilla tactics?" "Exactly. They're not the first to underestimate Earth. And they won't be the last." Kale grabbed his rifle from the corner of the room and strapped it to his back. The moment of hesitation was over. There would be no waiting, no hesitating. The human spirit was what set them apart, what had allowed them to survive in the most unforgiving environment in the universe. He stormed out of the command center and into the ruined streets, where scattered groups of survivors were assembling. His boots crushed broken glass and debris as he moved with purpose, his mind racing with strategies and plans. He knew what had to be done. "We're not waiting for a miracle," Kale shouted, rallying the troops. "We're the miracle. We fight on our terms, in our world." A cheer erupted from the soldiers who had gathered, battered but resolute. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were survivors, each one shaped by years of struggle, each one forged in the fires of war. And now, they would show the Talrath what it meant to challenge Earth. Kale gathered his forces, assigning roles with precision. His military experience, honed through years of conflict, kicked into high gear as he took charge. There was no room for doubt. No room for second guesses. The alien invaders would find out quickly that Earth's warriors didn't back down. They didn't surrender. "We're going to hit their landing zones. They think they own this planet. Let's show them what it means to face a death world." As Kale's team moved out, the distant sound of alien weapons fire crackled in the air, a reminder of the Talrath's overwhelming technological superiority. But Kale wasn't concerned with their advanced weaponry. He was concerned with using their overconfidence against them. The Talrath hadn't come to Earth expecting a fight. They had come to conquer. They had come thinking the planet was no different from any other they'd claimed before. That was their fatal error. The group reached the outskirts of a Talrath base that had been established near the remains of a major city. The base was surrounded by a shield, a glowing, shimmering force field that rendered any conventional attack useless. But Kale knew better than to rely on brute force. The Taurath were strong, yes, but they weren't infallible. They weren't invincible. Not on Earth. Kale signaled for the troops to split into smaller units, each moving into position around the base. His plan was simple, but effective. They would use the terrain, the environment, the very planet itself, as a weapon. "We don't need to break through their shields," Kale said, his voice calm yet filled with menace. "We'll make them break themselves." The team set up explosives at key points around the base, using their knowledge of the local terrain to manipulate the environment. A well-placed charge under the ground near the base's main power conduit would send shockwaves through the alien technology, destabilizing their systems. It was a risky move, but Kale was used to risks. As the countdown began, Kale's soldiers took their positions, ready to spring into action. The Taurath were still blissfully unaware, their focus on keeping the human resistance at bay. The shield hummed with power, but Kale knew it wouldn't last. "Get ready," Kale muttered under his breath. "They're about to learn that this world isn't theirs to conquer." The explosion shattered the silence, sending tremors through the ground. The shield flickered, sputtered, and collapsed, leaving the Taurath base exposed. Kale wasted no time. He gave the order to attack. The sound of gunfire, explosions, and screams filled the air as Kale and his forces stormed the base, taking advantage of the confusion. They knew this fight wasn't about winning on the first day. It was about sending a message. Kale led the charge, moving swiftly through the wreckage, his rifle firing with deadly accuracy. Alien soldiers fell before him, unable to react in time. The once proud invaders were now scrambling for survival, their advanced technology failing them in the face of human ingenuity and determination. The Taurath had come expecting to conquer, but they had underestimated Earth's warriors. Kale Draven wasn't just defending his planet. He was making sure the Taurath learned the hard way that Earth wasn't a world to be subdued. It was a world to be feared. "We'll show them how to fight a real war," Kale growled, his voice echoing across the battlefield. As the Taurath regrouped, Kale's forces continued their relentless assault. With each alien soldier that fell, Earth grew one step closer to reclaiming what was theirs. The fight was far from over, but for the first time since the invasion began, Kale allowed himself a small, grim smile. This was only the beginning. And Kale would make sure the Taurath never forgot the name Earth. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and scorched earth. Smoke curled into the night sky, and the bodies of fallen Taurath soldiers littered the battlefield. Kale Draven crouched behind a collapsed alien turret, reloading his rifle with practiced efficiency. His breath was steady, his heartbeat controlled. Victory here wouldn't win the war, but it would remind the Taurath that they had miscalculated. Kira Voss pressed against the debris beside him, her pulse rifle humming as she scanned the battlefield. "They're retreating." Kale smirked. "No. They're regrouping." From the far side of the enemy encampment, the shriek of an alien war horn cut through the night. Kale had heard it before, the call for reinforcements, for vengeance. The Taurath were prideful, and they would never let an attack like this go unanswered. Kale's earpiece crackled to life. "Commander, we're picking up heavy movement from the south. Looks like reinforcements, bigger ones." He exhaled sharply. "Time to move." Kira hesitated, her gaze locked on the battlefield. "We could hold this position, make them bleed harder." Kale shook his head. "We're not here for a siege. We hit fast, we cripple them, and we disappear before they can hit back." The soldiers moved like shadows, slipping through the ruins as the Taurath forces advanced. Kale led them through the debris-strewn alleyways, every step calculated, every movement efficient. The city had become their weapon, a labyrinth of destruction they knew better than the invaders. As they neared the extraction point, the ground trembled. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the streets. Kale turned, eyes narrowing. Something was coming. Then he saw it. A towering Taurath war beast, a fusion of organic muscle and alien machinery, stomped through the ruins, its thick, armored hide reflecting the fires around it. Its handlers, a squad of elite Taurath warriors, marched beside it, their weapons pulsing with lethal energy. Kale clicked his comm new problem. War beast inbound. The radio crackled. Extraction teams waiting, Commander. You have 5 minutes. Kira gritted her teeth. We don't have 5 minutes. The war beast let out a bone-shaking roar and charged. The ground splintered beneath its weight. Kale barely had time to shout before the monster slammed through a collapsed building, sending a shockwave of rubble and dust cascading through the streets. Move! The team scattered, opening fire as they ran. Energy rounds struck the war beast's hide but barely slowed it down. Its handlers moved in sync, covering its advance with suppressing fire. Kale dove behind cover, gritting his teeth. They needed a plan, fast. Kira's voice cut through the chaos. We take out the handlers first. The beast follows their commands. Kale nodded, already moving. You take left, I'll take right. The battle shifted. Instead of firing on the war beast, Kale and his soldiers targeted the handlers. The aliens were fast, but not fast enough. One by one, they fell, their bodies crumpling beneath a hail of gunfire. Without its handlers, the war beast hesitated, its monstrous head twisting in confusion. Kale seized the moment. Hit it now! A grenade launcher fired. The explosive hit its mark, detonating against the war beast's exposed flank. It roared in agony, staggering backward. More shots followed, concentrated, relentless. Its armor cracked, its limbs buckled, and finally, with a deafening bellow, the beast collapsed. Silence settled over the battlefield. Kale exhaled, rolling his shoulders. That was close. Kira smirked, reloading. I'd call that a warm-up. The comms buzzed again. Commander, status? Kale tapped his earpiece. War beast down. Moving to extraction. The team pressed forward, their path illuminated by the distant glow of burning ruins. The fight was far from over. The Talrath would return, stronger, angrier. But Kale wasn't afraid. This was just the beginning. And Earth wasn't done fighting yet. Kale moved like a predator through the ruins, his rifle steady, his mind sharper than the edge of a blade. The night air was thick with the scent of fire and blood, and he welcomed it. The war wasn't just a battlefield to him, it was his element, the place where he thrived. The comms crackled in his ear. Commander, Talrath forces regrouping. They're bringing heavy artillery. Kale gritted his teeth. They're angry. Good. Let them come. Kira jogged up beside him, her face set in grim determination. We've got 5 minutes before they start shelling this place. Kale's eyes swept the street ahead, collapsed structures, burned-out vehicles, bodies of soldiers who hadn't been fast enough. The city was a graveyard, but he saw something else, an opportunity. We set the trap here, he said. They think we're running, so we make them chase. Kira's lips curled into a wicked grin. They'll never see it coming. The team moved fast, planting explosives in the wreckage, setting up choke points, cutting off exits. Kale knew the Talrath, they relied on overwhelming force, but they weren't ready for a battlefield that fought back. The ground trembled. The enemy was close. Kale checked his rifle, exhaled, and stepped into the open. The first alien soldier spotted him, raising its weapon. Kale fired first. The shot ripped through the Talrath's skull, and the battlefield exploded into chaos. Gunfire filled the air as the enemy surged forward, but Kale's team was already in position. The first wave hit the traps, detonations ripped through the streets, sending shrapnel and debris slicing through their ranks. Alien screams echoed through the ruins. Kale moved with precision, cutting through the enemy lines, his every movement calculated for efficiency and devastation. A Talrath soldier lunged at him with a plasma blade. He sidestepped, drove his knife into the alien's throat, and shoved the body aside. Kira's voice rang through the comms. Commander, second wave inbound, heavies. Kale glanced up. A hulking Talrath mech stomped into view, its twin cannons glowing with deadly energy. Kale smirked. Finally, a real fight. He sprinted forward as the mech fired, rolling under the barrage just in time. Shrapnel rained around him, but he was already moving, already planning. "Kira, give me a distraction." Kira didn't hesitate. She lobbed a grenade at the mech's flank, forcing it to shift focus for just a second. A second was all Kale needed. He leapt onto the mech's armored leg, scaled its side, and jammed his rifle barrel into an exposed joint. He fired 3 precise shots, metal shattered, circuits fried. The mech groaned, its systems failing. Kale jumped clear just as it collapsed, smashing into the ground with a deafening crash. More Taurath poured in, but the battlefield was already theirs. The final explosives detonated, cutting off their escape. The enemy was trapped in their own graveyard. Kale stood amidst the wreckage, blood dripping from his knuckles, his breath steady. He pressed a hand to his comms. "Tell command. The city is ours." Kale stood on the balcony of the ruined tower, the smoke of burning Taurath war machines rising like twisted monuments to their failure. The battle was over, at least for now, but Kale knew better than to relax. This was Earth's first victory, but the war had just begun. His comms buzzed again. "Commander, we've got intel, Taurath reinforcements in orbit. A massive fleet is headed this way. And there's more, they weren't just here for Earth." Kale's jaw tightened. "Explain." There was a pause before the voice on the other end replied, "They're scouting. They're not here to conquer. They've sent reports back to their home system. They were looking for something worse than them." Kale closed his eyes, letting the words sink in. The Taurath had underestimated them, but that didn't mean the threat was over. If what the intel said was true, humanity had just become a pawn in a larger game. "Do we have a plan?" Kira asked, stepping up beside him, her rifle slung over her shoulder. Kale's eyes darkened. "We make one." The following days were a blur of strategic planning, repairs, and reinforcing Earth's remaining defense lines. Kale coordinated with resistance forces from around the globe. No matter where they were, hidden bunkers in the mountains, underground safe houses in the city, the resistance fought like cornered animals. And in a way, they were. The Taurath had overrun much of the world, but humanity wasn't finished yet. Kale walked the battlefield once more. Not for victory, but for understanding. He needed to know what the Taurath had missed, what they couldn't fathom about this planet, about its people. Earth wasn't just a death world to them. It was a crucible, where only the strongest could endure, and Kale knew the cost of that strength. Kira caught up to him, her face weary but resolute. "We're preparing for their next strike, but I have to ask. How do we even begin to fight what's coming?" Kale gave her a hard look. "We don't wait for them to come. We go to them. We hit them where they think we can't reach." Kira raised an eyebrow. "You want to take the fight to their homeworld?" "No," Kale replied coldly. "I want to show them how far we can push them before they break." Hours later, a group of human soldiers and resistance fighters gathered in a covert command center, just below the remnants of a shattered skyscraper. The map on the wall illuminated their faces, showing the Taurath fleet now hovering above Earth's atmosphere, massive warships ready to strike. "We've intercepted their communications," Kale began, addressing the group. "They were looking for something. But they won't find it. Not unless we give them what they're looking for." Kira stepped forward, raising a hand. "You're not talking about surrendering?" Kale's eyes blazed with fire. "No. I'm talking about drawing them in. Bait them into a fight they can't win." The room fell silent. A young soldier spoke up, his voice uncertain. "But how do we do that, sir?" "They have the advantage." Kale's lips twisted into a fierce grin. "They think they do. That's their mistake." Hours turned into days as Kale's plan unfolded. Every move was calculated with precision, as the resistance worked in tandem with military forces across the globe. Kale had no illusions. The Taurath might have better technology, but humanity had one advantage they would never understand. The Taurath underestimated humanity's creativity, its unpredictability. The next strike came like a storm. The fleet dropped out of orbit, and the sky was filled with the shriek of alien ships entering the atmosphere. The Talrath warships opened fire on Earth's remaining military bases, reducing entire cities to rubble. But this time, Kale was waiting. From beneath the surface, human fighters emerged. Ground units that had been lying in wait for months, hidden in plain sight, with only one objective: to make the Talrath understand they had provoked a force they couldn't comprehend. Kale led the charge, his team in tow. The Talrath soldiers, confused by the unexpected resistance, faltered for just a moment. That was all Kale needed. With brutal precision, his forces executed their plan, forcing the Talrath to fight on unfamiliar ground. The streets were lined with explosives, and every corner was a death trap. Kale's voice rang through the chaos. "Don't let them breathe. Keep the pressure on. Every inch of ground is ours." Kira moved alongside him, her face hard but resolute. "We push them into the heart of their own trap?" Kale nodded, his voice a growl. "Exactly. And when they realize the truth, it'll be too late." The battle raged for hours, but Kale's strategy was proving effective. The Talrath, caught in a web of human ingenuity, were forced to retreat. The ground around them was littered with alien bodies, their war machines disabled or destroyed. Finally, Kale stood in the midst of the wreckage, sweat and blood mingling on his skin. The Talrath had been pushed back. Earth had won again. But as he looked up at the sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Then came the message. A new fleet. A larger one. "They're coming for Earth in full force." Kale's eyes hardened. The enemy might retreat for now, but he knew they would return. "We'll be ready," Kale muttered, gripping his rifle. "But next time, we take the fight to them. And we finish it." The storm wasn't over. The war was just beginning. And Earth had proven one undeniable fact: humanity wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. They had only one choice now. Fight. And win.